Hello everyone, my name is Akal and I want to talk about Anuradha Nakshatra. So Anuradha is after Radha. And so Anuradha is very much related to Vishaka because Radha is one of the gods that is associated with Vishaka. So what we have here, very similar to Vishaka in the sense of goal-oriented. So they have a goal-oriented focus. But what I want to do in this video is I want to see how that goal-oriented focus plays out differently than it does in Vishaka. And, um, and we're going to look at this through how the planets intertwine and how the gunas, or the fundamental energies that underlie all existence, are expressing themselves. So starting off with the gunas, we have tamasic energy at its base. And again, just the explanation for gunas really quick. Three energies that underlie all existence. Rajasic energy is activity, tamasic energy is inertia or anchoring into the material, sattvic energy is clarity. So these individuals have tamasic energy, just like all the nakshatras in the second third of the zodiac are all materially focused or about a material achievement on some level. And that doesn't mean they're not spiritual. It just simply means that on a fundamental deep level, they're here to sort of express the spiritual on the material plane, you could say. So that is on the primary level. So on the secondary level, they're Suffix. So they're let's say their way, how they internally process the sort of their heart and their soul in a lot of ways is Sattvic or clear. And finally, how they express out into the world or how their sort of mind is functioning as tamasic. So there's an inertia here. And that would say, oh gosh, they must be really dull. No. One of the symbols that is associated with this nakshatra is the lotus. So the lotus is this flower that springs up through muddy waters, right? So that tamasic energy and how it influences the mind, it may have some inertia and some muddiness to it or some slowness to it, but what that really does is that it grants them clarity because they are functioning at Sattvic in terms of their internal process. So meaning they have discernment, they have the ability to find some neutrality and clarity, and so they can see through all the nonsense. So some of the descriptions of this nakshatra are actually really telling to this particular path. So, and one of those was the ability to see through propaganda. So I thought that was kind of cool, is the ability to see through propaganda. So they can throw nonsense at you, but if it's at your core, you are clear, you're not going to get enslaved to social trends. That happened in Libra, right? In Swati, there was a potential of getting pulled into social trends or the movement of the masses. This doesn't happen here. There's a rebellion that happens that says, "Ho, slow down." In a lot of ways, Anuradha reminded me a lot of Aquarian energy. And as I'm describing this, that may resonate for you as well. So some of the other words associated with this is unorthodox, which kind of echoes that idea that there's a little bit of rebellion here. Let's see, bright, optimistic, lighthearted, cooperative, friendly, musical, exploratory, bringing together extremes. That one I had to think about for a bit. So I'm like, why bringing together extremes? So bringing together extremes, to me, what that means is essentially, so you can think about what are the extremes exactly. And so you have like the worldly extremes. You could say like politically speaking, you have right versus left. We have all these polarities that exist on the material plane. So young versus old, all these different things. So these individuals are, Anuradha natives are the quote unquote universal solvent. They're the universal solvent. As a watery nakshatra, I thought that was an excellent description for essentially what their energy is here to do. They're here to cooperate. They're here to work with people. They're here to bring things together and create an alchemy of cooperation. Again, a synthesis kind of energy. Synthesis, Uranus, Aquarian energy once again. So that's why I'm saying this keeps echoing kind of Aquarian tendencies in a lot of ways. So but again, going back to this idea of bringing together extremes, you can only bring together extremes if you can find something universal. So what is universal that Anuradha is learning to tap into through its power to be clear? And that universal has to do with the fact that, okay, this is a nakshatra ruled by Mars, ultimately, because it's within Scorpio. Scorpio is watery. We're talking about the watery depths here. So it is Mars is the movement into emotion and the understanding of emotion and how emotion expresses itself out into the world. So one of the primary, I guess, yeah, one of the primary goals of this nakshatra is to understand how we shine from the inside out. So we have to understand our watery depths before we can express it out into the world and be a good guide, because there's some teaching that goes along here. So Anuradha is here to learn and gain knowledge and use that kind of clarity of mind in order to sort of teach and to guide and to lead. So, and again, this is unorthodox kind of energy, and it doesn't mean that they don't function with some sort of like level of discernment. They have a great deal of discernment. So this isn't just like totally open and like, goes with whatever. Like, yeah, there could be some of those kinds of tendencies with this nakshatra because it's considered quote unquote a passive nakshatra, but it's only passive when the Saturn aspect here ends up overruling or dominating the Mars aspect, because the Mars again wants to drive them. So how is Saturn playing into this? I mean, Saturn is an energy of contraction, so their awareness is being contracted to look at the emotional depths. The emotional depths, if you cut through all of our identification, so the identification is like the muddy waters, right? So the muddy waters is an emotion rises, our mind then labels it, identifies it as sad or happy or whatever it is. These individuals, because they are Sattvic in their way of being, can say, oh, you got to go below that. So you have sad, but what's sad feel like? Oh, you have happy, but what's happy feel like, right? So they just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper until you get to the root of the flow, because that's what emotion is. It is a flow. And that flow is ultimately connected to the bigger picture or the universe. So these individuals are learning to harmonize with the universe, which is a very open and accepting kind of thing, right? So these people are, again, they're kind of not, I wouldn't call them overly judgmental. This doesn't feel like super judgmental energy. It is on some level in terms of like they're here to sort of judge what's correct for them or not, but it's not judgmental of other people necessarily. So uh, something else I thought was quite interesting is that the energy of Anuradha is associated with the chakras or the serpent energy of Kundalini. The only other nakshatra I think up until this point that I saw that was associated with Kundalini was Aslesha, because it's ruled by the Nagas or the serpents. And anywhere you see serpents, you think Kundalini energy or the serpentine energy that moves up the spine. So in this particular case, this energy really has to do with these folks. To me, again, what it keeps feeling like to me is they're a conduit. These individuals are a conduit, and so that sense of passivity, because again, Saturn is contracting their energy to inwardly focus, and then when they inwardly focus, they learn what to surrender to, and in this case, they're aligning with universal will. So through universal will, these individuals can become very, very interested in yoga, tai chi, qigong, nidan, the occult, astrology, numerology, right? I think I mentioned already, I end up repeating myself sometimes, that this is the 17th nakshatra, so talking about numerology. So that being said, is the bringer of the celestial waters down to earth, which is the power of the number 17. So anyone who's not around a native listening to this, go ahead and explore number 17. It may resonate a great deal for you. So the goal-oriented focus of this nakshatra is always kind of, again, it's always about expressing out into the world. But once they learn to align with the will of God, the will of the universe, the will of the infinite, the will of their internal flow outward. And I keep thinking of like athletes in a lot of ways. Every time I think of flow, I think of athletes. It's just kind of my associations. But I think of like Michael Jordan and these sorts of people, these athletes who tap into a flow and then they're just like invincible, right? So there's a lot of invincibility that comes along with Anuradha. This is, like I said, it's extremely determined energy. but it's wise. It's very wise, determined energy. So the let's see what else I got going on here. So eighth house energies here. So again, this idea of the occult, the hidden. I'm getting sidetracked here a little bit, but again, this is more scorpionic expressions, but the occult and the hidden are very interesting subjects for Anuradha. So let me go ahead and go into the padas real quickly. That'll help put me back on track a bit. So the four padas, keeping in mind that the four padas, these four divisions within Anuradha Nakshatra, exist. Well, every nakshatra has four padas. And so these are four divisions. And these four divisions, in a lot of ways, are expressed always for every Anuradha. Well, for every nakshatra, those four padas are always expressing. And what they end up describing is the life path. Now, we can be born in, say, pada 2. In the case if you're born in a pada 2 with an Anuradha, that is Mercury. So it's going to have Mercury-like qualities emphasized. So you're going to get this intertwining of Saturn with Mars with Mercury, right? So, and how all those energies play together. And so keeping that in mind, you want to make sure that you're keeping a broader perspective when you're thinking about the padas, and that, like, hey, I'm in pada 2 and that's it. No, all four padas function for you because they describe Anuradha ultimately. So pada 1 is ruled by the sun. Oh, the one thing I should say really quickly is that these are fast nakshatras. So meaning that the evolution of Anuradha is quick. These are fast moving planets. We have Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the sun. So these are fast moving personal planets. So they move very quick, and they talk about personal individual evolution. So the sun, I wrote, if you're born in pada 1, is ruled by the sun, and I wrote I before we. I guess my fuzzy cover here is getting in the way. So I before we, what does that mean? It means we shine from the inside out. We have to learn about working with the inner before we work with the outer. Now, I want to bring something up really quickly because that is a dominant theme from Anuradha in general, correct? Because we talked about the celestial waters, we talked about internal processing, the understanding of energy as it relates to emotion, etc. Vishaka. Vishaka was ruled by Jupiter. So you had a constant energy of expansion as it related to material things. Keeps expanding and going and going and going, and that was very Vishaka. The issue there is that there was a potential, because you're expanding outside all the time, there was the potential to not do the inner work, right? It was the one of the forks of Vishaka was the potential to go into void filling, sex, drugs, alcohol, etc. And again, every nakshatra has that potential of going that route, as every human being does. But in Anuradha, I feel like this is the energy that exemplifies the need to do the internal anchoring, to find that which is solid, home. This is home, the body is home. Once they can anchor into home, anchor into understanding their emotions, they can then express those emotions in a non-toxic way outside of oneself. So if you're born in the first pada, powerful energy, a lot about shining, you're going to have to put your pride or any sort of militancy aside. Again, because the militancy, rebellion, these are kind of words that are associated with this nakshatra. And I don't mean those in a sort of a violent kind of way. What I do mean, though, is that, again, I mentioned that this is about cutting through propaganda. It's that they had this clear mind. So when you have a clear mind, you can see social trends, you can see social dynamics, you go, you can see where the, the bullshit is. So, but the necessity here is to discover the I before you merge with the we. Because again, merging with the we, you are the leader, you are the teacher, you're here to do those sorts of things. So, second second pada, we have Mercury. And I put demystify the universe, right? This is where you get intelligence. So demystifying basically means to bring something out of the shadows. Eighth house, right? So anyone who has a lot of, let's say, an eighth house moon, or if you're a Scorpio ascendant, or Scorpio energy in a lot of ways is about demystifying things, right? So but it's about, in some ways, demystifying something in order to make it practical. And because again, Anuradha is a bridge energy. It is an energy that is here to bring heaven to earth. So they're, in some ways, they're here to digest. And again, if you were born in the second pada, that Mercury helps you digest, right? Because Mercury is basically, it gives you perspective on the duality, right? So Mercury wants to look at this and that, this and that. If anyone who's had conversations with any nakshatras or signs, Virgo, Gemini, ruled by Mercury, you can see there's kind of this internal processing where they're looking at this and that, and they can kind of move these things around in their mind. So Anuradha has this capacity as well, and particularly if you're born into the second nakshatra, is that they can sit there and look at everything to discern and to say, hey, that's for me. And they can channel their energy, their focus to connect, well, channel it and focus it inward in order to express it outward. Again, same notion of shining from the inside out. Venus, I put down boho hedonism. I guess the light is sort of smudging it out. Anyway, bohemian. So this is where you get some uniqueness. You get the sort of, and again, I keep thinking about Aquarius, the sort of uniqueness, the individualism, the I is separated from the we. And so what that does is it can create some very unorthodox kind of characteristics, some very unique expressions in life in terms of their character and their disposition. And I wrote hedonism. I don't always think hedonism is a bad thing. There's actually, if you understand Tantra, for instance, Tantra being, people tend to associate Tantra with sex. Not necessarily, but I could see these kinds of folks getting into sort of Tantra things. So sex, drugs, alcohol, eating meat, all these sorts of things they're not shunned within Tantra or if you're on a tantric path. Rather, everything is really about the movement towards enlightenment, and you're simply using the tools the tools available in a way in order to move you towards enlightenment. So the abuse of a drug or alcohol or sex or those sorts of things have to do with unconscious behavior. So if you're doing something as a ritual, if you're doing something as sacred, let's say you say, hey, I'm going to have 2 glasses of wine, but I'm not doing this for the ego's sake. I'm doing this for the sake of meditation, and this is indeed a sacred thing. So in that particular case, it's very much like a tantric kind of practice to use alcohol for meditation or marijuana for meditation or sex to move energy. So I think with Venus in the third pada, you could probably get a very strong tendency of this kind of behavior, right? There is the potential of the self-undoing that goes along with that, though. What I mean by the self-undoing, it has to do with, again, if you are not using something as sacred, if you abuse alcohol, you abuse drugs, things of that nature, it can be problematic. However, also with the third pada, you're getting very unique expressions of aesthetic, artists, musicians, things of that nature. So yeah, I mean, again, we're adding a whole other level of sort of material focus because Venus is a very material planet. And it has to do with what you're magnetizing towards you and what you desire to do. So yeah, you're getting a lot of that with here. Again, think artistic inclination, music, unorthodox, interesting. But again, it's about spirituality here, right? This is very, very, very much about bringing spirituality into a practical material plane expression. So, 4th pot of Mars. The Mars energy, I wrote, see, it's kind of my fuzzy things in the way again here. I wrote intense energy channeled. So intense energy channeled, what's that mean? So Mars, you have more Mars on top of Mars, right? So Scorpio ruled by Mars, and then you have more Mars. So one of the things about this nakshatra is they talk about the passivity that exists, and the passivity exists only when these individuals are ruled by the Saturnian influence, and the Saturnian influence is contracting their energy always to get them to understand the spiritual principles of flow. And so when they start to understand the spiritual principle of flow, they can direct that will, their will, out into the world, being in connection with universal will. So once they're aligned with universal will, then there's a balance between the Saturn and the Mars. So when you're born in the fourth pada, though, there's an extra oomph of Mars here. So that extra level of Mars, one of the things you're going to have to learn if you have that fourth pada energy is slow it down a little bit, because it's such intense energy. And also what you're getting here is you're getting what I would consider the sort of absolute pinnacle of the necessity to learn to channel that energy. So much intense emotional drive, and you need to channel it. And so channeling it always goes back to choice. Is that there's this intense emotional drive. What are you channeling it towards, right? So with this fourth pada, you could, in terms of this being very goal oriented and goal focused, that's to me where it really, really expresses in this fourth pada is that potential for total material focus to go into the material realm of things. And again, like it goes back to the same theme, which is what are you aligning to? So fourth pada, essential that you learn to align to universal will, because that's where the greater power is. Don't get sidetracked by tapping into weaker powers. I keep bringing up occult thought with Anuradha because to me this is one of those energies where you're going to the hidden and the occult are so important because of that sort of need to tap into divine will or universal will or infinite will or God's will or whatever you want to call it. And if you don't channel that correctly, it kind of slams you into things. This is ruled by Saturn. Keeping that in mind, it's going to slam you into things that could bring some discomfort, pain, fear, and suffering, etc., if you don't align it correctly. So fourth pada, slow it down, learn to channel the very, very intense life force energy that is moving through you towards that which is universal. Bringing things together, be that diplomat, become that bridge to merge everything into universal understanding. So anyway, just last thing, all four padas apply to you if you're an Anuradha native. And I think that's all I want to kind of talk about. Let me go ahead with my notes real quickly. One of the other, I'll just I'm throwing out random things I have in my notes here. So the lower and higher, right? So lower and higher realms are something else that's happening here. So with Anuradha energy, it's about bringing an understanding of the lower realms, the material realms, the three-dimensional understanding, into the higher realms, the 5D, 4D understanding. Again, it's about merging all these things. So this is again, synthesis is a big word here, even though you don't see Uranus being anywhere in this chart, but Uranus in a lot of ways very synthesis-oriented kind of energy. So, I think that's all I want to mention. So that being said, if you happen to be in Chicago area and you need energy work, body work, reach out. I have my website down posted below the video. Also, if you're interested in having your birth chart interpreted, I do human design, I do, traditional astrology, etc. So if these are areas you're interested in having me interpret, once again, website down below the video. Thank you all.